In this knife talk video, we're going to be looking at these two knives, and these are Gradation Cutlery's versions of the classic Sodbuster pattern. So first off, to tell you what these knives are, this is the Gradation Cutlery Farm and Field number 71 bullnose in orange Delrin, and this is the Gradation Cutlery Farm and Field number 21 Bullbuster in black linen micarta. And you can see that they're just two different sizes of basically the same design, and that design is basically a very typical traditional Sodbuster design. So the Sodbuster is one of the most traditional, again, and classic of the American working knives. It's a knife that is named after kind of what was originally a negative term for the, farmers and people who busted the sod. It is a work knife. It's a farmer's knife or a working knife, and that's held true on these Gradation Cutlery versions. Now, there's lots of other Sodbuster knives made by other companies. I'm hoping, if I can, justify buying more versions of the same type of pattern from other companies, I'm hoping to do a comparison between Gradation Cutlery, Case, Rough Rider, and Mazarin Cutlery, and A.G. Russell, all different Sodbuster patterns. But we'll see about that. But for now, this is Gradation Cutlery's versions. So first off, let's talk about the brand itself. So you heard me say that it's a Farm and Field knife. That's the brand. Gradation Cutlery makes several brands. They have their Northfield, which is their high-end, usually polished and everything. Titty-Ute, which is, definitely collector quality, but less fancy features. Then they have Gradation Cutlery, which is their practical knives, which are stainless, and then they have Farm and Field Tool, which are work knives, as you can see that it says right here. These knives are of a lower fit, or not necessarily fit, but a lower finish than even the Titty-Ute and Gradation Cutlery knives. And I'll talk about some of the ways that manifests here later on these knives. But they're still really well-made knives. They're still, made at Gradation Cutlery, and really nice knives. They've done a bunch of different patterns in the Farm and Field Tool line, and there's a bunch of nice knives. I've done some videos on some other ones, so you can check those out. But like I said, this is the 71 in orange Delrin, which is the smaller of the two, and this is the first one that came out. They have done a bunch of runs of this pattern. I've done some videos on different ones. This is actually, I think, the nicest of all of the 71s that I've had. I've had quite a few. I had one from the first run in 01 Tool Steel that I ended up getting rid of, and then I had another one from that run, and I had, I think, two from this run that was done in 2018, as you can see on the tang stamp there. And I think this is the nicest of them. The one that I had from the first run was really nice also. I sold it a while ago, so I don't have a great memory of the construction and stuff, but it was definitely nice, and I actually see the person who I sold it to post it relatively frequently still on Blade Forums, so it's still going strong. And that's, not a surprise on these knives. So this is the smaller of the two, and it's called the bull nose. They don't use the Sodbuster term. I think that Case has that trademarked. Case has that on some pattern names that are really like, pattern names that have been used for a long time. But so they just called this the bull nose, and this was the first one, the 71, which is the smaller of the two. And the next, which I've also had a couple of, had one from the first run again, which was in 2014, I think, and then one from, actually two from that run, and then this one is the Bullbuster. So this is the number 21, and it is much larger. So this one is about 3.5 inches closed, I'm sorry, 3 3/4 closed, and this one is about 4 3/4 closed, something like that. So it's a much bigger knife. This is a a full-size Sodbuster, and I think that this is even a little bit bigger than Case's full-size Sodbuster, but I'm not 100% sure of that. I haven't had one of those in a long time. But this is Gradation Cutlery's larger version. You can see that it's really, really similar. So let's talk about some of the design characteristics of both. So one thing that might be the first thing you notice is that these knives don't have bolsters. So there's no metal tip at the top or bottom. And you can call this type of pattern without any bolsters a shadow pattern. And you can see, no bolsters on either side, so it's just handle material. And then the pivot is what you call a bird's eye pivot. And that's where there is a metal usually, or sometimes, especially on custom knives, G10 and things like that, circle around the actual pivot pin so that the pivot pin can be peened or hammered to actually expand it and create kind of a press fit there. So it makes for a strong pivot. I have found these knives to be really strong, to take a lot of hard use and not develop blade play or anything. So that's a bird's eye pivot. You can see it says F&F for Farm and Field, USA, and I actually like the look of that pivot. I've thought about having these thinned down, which some custom makers and modifiers do, because it would probably make them a little bit more easily pocketable, but I like the look of the bird's eye pivot. So that's the next thing, is that these knives are not very thin. They are thick, and I think that that is, the reason for that is twofold. One is that it just takes less sanding, less finishing time. They just have to round these corners. And the second reason is that it does, if you're really going to be using this knife, it does make it so that it fills your hand. It's not going to, be so thin that it creates hot spots and things like that. I think that that is part of the reason, and I've used, especially the smaller of the two, this design quite a bit, and they feel good in the hand. One thing about the handles, the smaller one is just big enough, I think, for my hand. You can see that my finger really comes up right to the edge there, and my hand is really wide in this direction. And then if you look at my hand on this one, there's lots of extra space, like an inch of extra space, which makes sense. So this is definitely a big knife. It's a big handle. You'd be able to really, get a hold of it. And, if you have big gloves on, you could still use it and everything like that. Speaking of which, kind of moving on to the blade, both of these are pretty pinchable. So you can use the thumbnail as I have, or the thumb nick as I have been doing, or you can pinch it open. And that's a nice feature on a work knife. Makes it easier to open and close, as you can see. Speaking of the blades, both of these have what GEC, I think, tends to call a Skinner blade on these. It's really a drop point, and I'd have to look it up. I didn't look it up before this, but both of them, the third number on the tang stamp is the blade shape designation. Both of them are a 5, but it's basically a drop point, really utilitarian. I think a nice looking blade. You can see they both have a good belly, not super abrupt, but not quite as gradual a curve as the drop points on the 23 that Gradation Cutlery makes, if you are familiar with that. But just a good using blade shape. They seem to be ground thin, good for cutting, while still being relatively strong, kind of typical thickness for GEC on the blades. Now, another thing about the construction of the design here is that you can see they're all steel, so there's no brass, which does make them a little bit less prone to discoloring and stuff like that. So you can use it and get it wet and not have to worry about it too much. So that's the design of these knives. That's typical of Sodbusters. Very simple design, nice simple handle, and just meant to be strong and used in a working knife. Moving on to the fit and finish. So these knives, this knife was $53 and this was $63 shipped. That's low for a gradation cutlery knife. It's pretty much the lowest that gradation cutlery knives are now. When these first came out, I think they were under $50. It might have been $47 or something like that. But pretty close to that, and it really is a good deal because they are so well made. But what makes them lower priced? Well, like I said, there's less finishing. Because there aren't bolsters, they don't have to finish the bolsters and make them either satin or polished on, you know, for either end. The handles, because they're thicker, like I said, there's just less finishing to do, less rounding. You can see that this one is flat. You know, wasn't really sanded too much at all up here. So that's one thing that definitely lowers the price a little bit. Another is that the finish just isn't quite as, you know, perfect. This one doesn't have much gaps at all, but maybe a little bit of gap between the back spring and the liners there. This one also did have, I don't think you'll be able to see it now because it came off, but there was a little spot right here where there was like a sliver of metal that hadn't been, you know, just brushed off. So that kind of thing wouldn't make it through without being caught by quality control on the Tidiute or Northfield brands. But as for the actual like usability and practical construction, they're really good. You can see it's very, very slightly off center here on this one, but not too much at all. Very, very reasonable, not a problem at all. The pull on this one is really, really nice. I'd say 5.5, maybe 6. Easy to open and absolutely no blade play. So it's not like, you know, you have to worry about the fact that it might, you know, not open the right way or have blade play or anything. And the same can be said about this one. Like I say, this is probably the nicest of the bull noses I've gotten. Really, really nice action on this one. A little bit more snappy than the larger one here. And probably a 6 on the pull. And just really nice, snappy. You can see that it's, again, slightly off center, but pretty close to perfectly centered. Neither of them came with proud tips, which is something that's, you know, I mention a lot in my videos. I really don't like proud tips. But again, a little bit of gaps between the spring and liners. There's a little kind of mark right there that probably wouldn't make it through on a Tidiute or definitely Northfield knife. And the back spring isn't, you know, super flush in all the positions. It's not that bad, but you know, that's not something I worry about or even really check on all of my knives. But one thing I did want to mention on these is two things. One, people felt that the springs were either too strong or they thought that the pivots were too tight on these 2018 bull noses. That's not at all the case on this one. So I think maybe it's handle dependent. Maybe the micarta ones were tighter. The micarta ones I had were tighter than this, but I'm not sure. The other thing that someone asked me if these had blade wrap, because some of these had blade wrap, and I think in the past maybe these have had. Neither of these have any blade wrap, and I checked pretty well because I really don't like blade wrap. Blade wrap, if you don't know, is when as you're closing the knife, if you don't, you know, close it slowly, so if you let it close on its own like that, the edge will hit the back spring. And you can tell by looking or feeling with your fingernail. Just make sure you don't cut yourself. This one definitely doesn't have any. Same deal. I'll open and close this one and show you that it doesn't have any. So again, you know, you can't see any on the edge there, and you can't feel it either. Well, this one might have some. I checked really, really well, and I think this happened in my other bullnose video, but yeah, I think this one might have a little bit of blade wrap. I don't know why that happens when I've already checked a bunch of times and I'm filming. It ends up showing up, but yep, I think this one has a little bit. But that's okay. We'll see. At least I found it. But I can sharpen it. I haven't sharpened either of these knives, so I'll sharpen it and see if that fixes it. I did drop the kick like ever so slightly on this one. It didn't have any proud tip. The tip wasn't proud, but I just thought it could be a little lower. I probably don't need to do that on so many knives, but anyway, I'll sharpen it and see if that helps. But speaking of the handles, this one, like I said, it was orange Delrin. I really like it. It looks like a kind of a burnt orange. It feels good. I think it's a little bit more, grippy than the acrylic that GEC uses, and I really like it. This is black linen micarta. It's fine. I think that it's a fine looking handle material. I wish that they would maybe use black paper micarta, but I have been thinking about, or I've been trying to trade this for a bullnose and orange Delrin. I don't really want to buy, another one. I'd rather trade this one for it. But anyway, both nice knives. I'll probably do an update on this one to see if that blade wrap can be sharpened out relatively easily, and I hopefully will be able to do a video on the Sodbuster pattern in general with more Sodbuster type knives from other companies. So if you've enjoyed this video, please like it. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below. And don't forget to check out my other videos. I've got a whole bunch of videos. And subscribe to my channel if you want to get updates when I post other videos. And don't forget to go out and do good.